2, 3, 4.
It's little time.
Hi, I'm Neil McCormick, and you're watching Needle Time, where my guest is a man who's come all the way from north of the border via Vienna, who's co-writer on one of the biggest records ever released and never received a penny for it. Midge.
It's not a good career so far, is it?
Well, it's been a very, very interesting career. So many bands and dimensions and different types of music. So that's what we're going to talk about, all of that. So where did it begin? Why was it music in the first place?
Oh, music was always there. I mean, I was born in a tenement in the outskirts of Glasgow back in the 50s, and the only musical instrument we had was a radio. So my musical education, I suppose, was the Light programme or the Home programme, whatever it was that the BBC had at the time. And it just played this really odd mishmash of music. So I would hear everything from, Frank Sinatra to, Mantovani to, early kind of Elvis or whatever. So you'd hear all of this stuff. So it was a really odd kind of Catholic taste in music that you ended up with, this really diverse thing. And music to me was just incredibly exciting. The whole idea of doing something that you could naturally do. I could always sing, I always had a voice. Right. But the idea of doing that and somebody paying you for it was just ridiculous. But what a lovely dream to have. And it also took me out of the reality of living in a slum tenement.
So was music, you had the radio. We know that the working class environment at that time and the Scottish environment had a lot of singing just as a kind of thing going on around the house. Was it that kind of household?
It wasn't that kind of household, mate. It really was a tiny little flat. My mother used to sing all the time. And I suspect my father, because when we used to go to his mother's, my grandmother, she had a piano. And we used to sit and play, Can You Wash a Sailor's Shirt? All this stuff. And my dad would sit at the piano and vamp these things out. Very Les Dawson. More missed notes than hit ones. But he obviously had some kind of musical flair there. But in Scottish culture, I suppose traditional Scottish music was kind of rammed down your throats at school. The jigs and reels and the laments and, all of that stuff, which I thought was incredibly dull and boring at the time because I was more interested in pop music. And it wasn't until much, much later on that I realised what kind of impact those melodies of those traditional Scottish tunes actually had on me, because it kind of came out eventually.
You learned the guitar, so why were you attracted to the guitar, or did the guitar just arrive in the house?
No, it didn't. No, I moaned until this thing appeared. I saw...
So you were very fixated on it.
I was fixated on it. I used to do drawings. The only thing I was good at school was music and art. So I used to draw guitars long before I was allowed anywhere near one. And it was a fixation. I remember hearing on the Light programme or the Home programme, whatever it was, Santo and Johnny playing this beautiful instrumental called Sleepwalk. And it was just the most haunting piece of music. And I had no idea what was making this noise. But the sound of this lap steel guitar, it's fantastic. It was just so atmospheric. And when I found out what it was, I kind of wanted one of these things. That, in conjunction with going to the Saturday morning pictures, the movies that kids used to do back then, and seeing Tommy Steele in some dreadful movie with a white suit and a guitar, and all the girls loved him. All the girls thought he was wonderful in this movie. So I thought, well, if I get a guitar, maybe that'll happen to me. So my parents scraped up the princely sum of £2, at a time when my dad's wages was £6 a week. So there was a substantial investment on this guitar, which I still have today. Luckily, it was a good guitar. And then I kind of taught myself.
Was it a possible career? I mean, in your mind, obviously, you're thinking I'd like to be a rock and roll star, but was it a possible career at the time? Did you think, well, that's something I can do, or as opposed to get down the shipyard or wherever it would have been?
Absolutely not. It was pure fantasy. And I think you kind of had to be a fantasist. You know, back in my day, it would have been sport. You know, football. You become a football player, or music. And probably, in reality, it was probably easier to become a football player than it was to become a musician back then. Because Glasgow was a kind of, in Scotland in general, was a kind of musical desert. There weren't any labels. There weren't any recording studios. The only recording studio I knew of in Glasgow was a little 4-track studio. This was much later on, that used to record accordion bands, and that's, you know, the kind of traditional Highland Scottish music. So it really was pure and utter fantasy. It was daydreaming. You know, the world my head inhabited was infinitely more interesting than the real world that I inhabited.
Was there an idea when you started to play music of what kind of music you wanted to do? Because we look ahead, when we go ahead through your career, we're going to see a lot of different styles of music. Did you have an idea of what music you wanted to play?
No, thanks to the radio again. You know, if you were subjected to everything coming out the one little speaker, you know, you have no choice over what you listen to. It wasn't until much later when, you know, you could buy your own records and you had a record player and you could choose what kind of music you really wanted to hear that kind of scratched your itch, as it were. It wasn't until, you know, the Beatles came along and, you know, maybe the Small Faces and bands that you could see on television, and you checked out the style and the sound of what they did. That's when it kind of all changed. That was when we were saying just before we started the interview that you stopped dressing like your dad. That's when you started finding your own particular style. You've got to kiss a lot of frogs, you know. So I kissed a lot of frogs.
Right. The first frog we saw you kissing, you may have been in bands in Glasgow, but suddenly you were on Top of the Pops very quickly with this Scottish band Slick, which were somewhere between the Beatles and the Bay City Rollers. In fact, I think there was Bay City Rollers songwriters involved in that. But you were kind of a boy band, rock band.
We were in existence as a band for 3 or 4 years, as a band in Scotland called Salvation. The singer eventually left after a couple of years, and I took over vocals. I was the guitarist, and I took over vocals. It became a 4-piece, cut all our long hair off after seeing a Dirty Harry movie. We came out and thought, I've got to look like that. So we had these kind of James Dean cuts. And again, Scotland was still this musical desert. There was nothing happening up there in reality. Everything was London-centric. You know, all the record companies and all the labels and everything was in London. And we were still in Glasgow at the time. And Bill Martin, who was one half of the Martin Coulter songwriting team, who wrote all the Bay City Rollers and things, he was in Glasgow for some reason and heard us rehearsing This Town Ain't Big Enough for Both of Us, the Sparks tune. And he thought it was the record, and came out and saw these 4 reasonably good-looking young guys making this noise, and instantly snapped us up. And we had the dreadful decision to make of, do we want to do this because it's not really what we want to do? We'd much rather have been Roxy Music, but that wasn't going to happen. Or do we do this and hope that we can grow out of it and be allowed to do what we want to do eventually? And lo and behold, we signed a contract. It was the only deal we were ever going to get, that we thought at the time. And the moment we signed the deal, everything changed, because punk came along, and all of a sudden independent labels started appearing in Scotland. The whole makeup of how music was discovered and nurtured in Scotland completely changed after we signed that deal.
Right.
When we join together, let none tear apart. We give one another our hand and our heart, my love. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Will love last forever? I know that it must, my love. Now you can see, now you can feel, now you can tell that it was real. Now you can tell that it was real. I dedicate to you all my love, my whole life through. I love you forever.
So behind your back, this new world was evolving.
Yeah.
And you were, you know, in a very 70s top of the pops time moment. Those songs are good songs, but they weren't your songs.
No.
They were they big choruses and good chord changes, but you had a very slick kind of image. Well, but you were achieving a lot of success. So were you content, happy, unsatisfied? What was the feeling in the band?
It was immense frustration. I remember getting the phone call from, I think it was Bill Martin, the day Slick's Forever and Ever went to #1, and I was numb on the phone because it wasn't mine. I didn't write it. I didn't produce it. I had nothing. If truth be told, I wasn't even allowed to play on it because that's how they did it in those days. You know, I remember turning up at the recording studio on South Molton Street in London with a 5-ton truck full of our equipment to make our first record. And we walk into the studio and we could hear the strains of what sounded like a bad Bay City Rollers B-side. And that was our track. Wow. The session guys had been in that day. So I felt absolutely nothing. And it was weird. It was a really strange sensation because overnight, after doing Top of the Pops with this track, I was recognised everywhere I went. You know, all of a sudden I was incredibly attractive to the opposite sex. Guys wanted to kick my face in. Everything went haywire. But it wasn't mine. I didn't feel as though I had earned that. So a couple of tracks later, a couple of singles later, Martin Coulter came up with a song called The Kids Are Punk. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back. That was it. We just said, look, I don't care if we're contracted or not, we're not doing this anymore. And we broke the contract. And at that point, it was over and done. You know, we were finished, we were washed up. We had a 15 minutes and were very highly unlikely to see the limelight again.
You're watching Needle Time with my guest, Midge. So, in your early 20s, a pop star, washed up. In Slick, you weren't writing your own songs. Were you already writing your own songs at this point? Was this something that you...
Yeah, I think absolutely. The early songwriting was like every aspiring songwriter. It was very derivative of what I was listening to at the time. So I could play you various tracks and you'd go Roxy Music, oh that's Queen, and oh that's David Bowie, and you know it was very, very foundling baby footsteps. But it was a start. It was something we wanted to do. And it was something that, as far as we could tell, there was nowhere you could go to learn how to do this stuff. You just had to write some bad ones and hope that eventually you figured it out, and some nice ones would pop out. You know, something worth writing. And it wasn't until later, when I moved to London, that I started thinking about songwriting seriously, because it was a very different environment, a very different emotional and musical and political environment. All of a sudden moving to London, turning up and you know, going to anti-racist demonstrations and concerts and the anti-Nazi League and all of that stuff. You think, how come I didn't know about this stuff in Glasgow? Because it wasn't an issue in Glasgow at the time, but it was a massive issue in London. So being submerged in all of that affected what you saw, what you thought, how you thought, and what you wanted to write about. So it was a very different thing.
But you did become an interesting post-punk band, which was the Rich Kids, where you had Glenn Matlock from the Sex Pistols on bass. And you are almost the first of that post-punk, you know, this is the new wave, whatever it became, power pop, which is, it's still got the melodic shape of 60s rock music, but it's got the energy of punk. It's not black and dark, it was flamboyant. And
yeah, it was a bit flamboyant, and it was a bit more controlled, I think, than punk. It was a bit more musical, and you kind of wore it like a badge of pride. You know, you thought, well, this is, you know, we can play, we are good players, and it had the energy and it had the kind of punk ethos, But Glenn had been there and done it with one of the original bands. I had turned down the opportunity to join the Pistols back in '75 or '76.
I completely forgot about that. And yet it always shows up on your CV.
It's always there. But we'd kind of had our little run-ins with it. So punk at this point had kind of moved on. You were in second, third generation punk bands. And the Rich Kids didn't really fall into that category. Glenn came from that background. I came from the pop background. We either fell on stony ground most of the time, or had a very odd niche audience who weren't really interested in the spitting and the fighting and the getting bottled on stage and things. So it kind of fit. It really did end up falling on stony ground. But as a band, it was actually quite an interesting band. And had we sustained it longer than the one album that we did, it may have turned into something else. I introduced a synthesizer to the Rich Kids, which Glenn hated, which actually, it was the synthesizer that broke the band up. It wasn't any of the individuals. I bought this synthesizer because I'd been listening to a lot of music that had been happening in Europe, and that's what kind of killed the band.
I'm talking about Rich Kids, guys too much to use. You got so much feeling, something special to do. Come to the Rich Kids, for you had better beware. The thing about Rich Kids, they got long hair.
Let's just backtrack one moment, because what is the story of your audition? It seems so unlikely that you are the singer in, Scottish boy band and you audition for Malcolm McLaren's Prototype Sex Pistols. How did that even happen?
Well, I didn't audition. That was the thing. I was coming out of a shop in Glasgow at a time when the world and his brother had flared trousers and long hair, and I had just had my Dirty Harry haircut, and I was stopped by Bernie Rhodes. I didn't know it was Bernie Rhodes. I wouldn't have known that until much later. And he said, "My friend's round the corner sitting in the car, and I would love to talk to you about music." And I went and met this guy, and it was the most bizarre looking guy I'd ever seen in my life. Back in 75, 76 maybe it was. There was Malcolm McLaren sitting there with his mohair jumper and his kind of dog collar and things, very effeminate looking, and I thought this was very strange. And I wasn't quite sure why these guys were talking to me. And of course he went into the whole thing about he'd managed the New York Dolls, and he had a shop, and the fashion designer girlfriend, and And then eventually he said he was putting his band together, and would I be interested in joining the band? And I thought, well, he hasn't even asked if I'm a musician, so the musician part is obviously on the back boiler. It doesn't really matter. So I said no thanks, and turned it down. And of course, the band that he was putting together was the Pistols. Didn't know whether he wanted me as a guitarist or the vocalist or whatever. He just wanted me to be in the band, I think probably because of the look, right, rather than any particular talent that I might have had.
I wonder what the Sex Pistols would have been like with
rubbish. Rubbish. It would have been dreadful. I mean, I could, I could have been in there. I could have played guitar in it or something. That'd have been fine. Would I have had the attitude for it? No, it would have been alien. I would have to, come down to London and play acted the entire thing, which is would have, had a detrimental effect on what it was all about.
The synthesizer that's an interesting jump, and a few guitarists made it. Dave Stewart was a guitarist, and he heard a synthesizer. What was it about the synthesizer that attracted you?
If I go way back, I remember watching a program called Tomorrow's World, which was a kind of science program that used to be on around the time of Top of the Pops, I think. And I remember seeing them having this guitar synthesizer. It was a guitar organ or something, and you played this guitar, and a keyboard sound came out, and I thought this was fantastic. And then I started realising that if you had an instrument like this synthesizer thing, you couldn't not only emulate other instruments, cellos and strings and things, but you could create instrument sounds that only you could create, only sounds that you could have in your head, sounds that didn't really exist. And that kind of musical palette, that sound palette to me was just hideously exciting. The fact that you could use this one machine and make a bass drum sound, or something it resembled a bass drum, but it wasn't really a bass drum. Make a snare sound that didn't really sound like snare, but it did the same job. And you could build up one piece at a time, this jigsaw puzzle, and use this one instrument to make this entire musical landscape. And that to me was just really exciting. A guitar is a guitar. It sounds cleaner, it sounds distorted. It always sounds like a guitar. And I, as a guitarist, I love my guitar, and I love making those noises. But this other thing that I didn't really understand was just, it's like giving an artist colours that he'd never seen before.
Sans la pluie comme un été anglais, entend les notes d'une chanson lointaine, sortant de derrière un poster, espérant que la vie ne fût aussi longue.
That was the making of you as a musician and songwriter.
I think the major part of it. I think my songwriting is very odd, and the way I go about it is very odd. It all goes hand in hand with the machines. So when I started dabbling with the synthesizer and a tape recorder, that's when my songwriting really kind of took on its own life. And I still do it that way today. I still need the machinery around me. The machinery becomes the band. It's a great way of kind of sketching your ideas for a song. I could count on one hand, maybe one finger, the amount of songs that I've written sitting with a guitar or a piano. I do it using this palette of colours.
Right. Even I'm trying to think. Well, the first thing was Visage, which is very electro. But even later on, when you're reaching band age, you're still.
Yeah, the electronic thing was great. I mean, Visage was a great example. Using the electronics, but working with other musicians. Outside of the realms that you would normally work in. That's where I first met Billy Currie, keyboard player with Ultravox, as they were back then. John McGeer, Barry Adamson, Dave Formula, all from Magazine.
Yeah.
And just great musicians who all wanted to do something experimental, and Visage happened to be the conduit for that. And through working on the Visage project, where all I really wanted to do was get in the studio and be allowed to make the music that I was kind of conjuring up in my head. Up until that point, I wasn't allowed to do that. So I wanted to be a producer. So that was a great vehicle for that. But through that vehicle, met Billy Currie and ended up joining Ultravox.
Watching Needle Time with my guest Midge. So we're about to take you, in this next juncture from proto boy band, proto new wave band into electro, where you have your greatest success. But just at that point, you went off and joined Thin Lizzy for a bit. Mm. In fact, when you came in here, this is Tony Visconti's old studio. You said you'd been in here with Phil Lynott.
I didn't recognise it, but I had Phil Lynott used to record in here. Lizzie recorded quite a lot of their albums here, and Phil did quite a few of his solo records here. And I remember being here when Phil was having toured with them and exposed them all with great chagrin on their part to the delights of electronic music and stuff. Phil got quite influenced by this and wanted some of this electronic stuff on his solo album. So I remember sitting here with Billy Curry from Ultravox and a couple of synthesizers, and we put together Yellow Pearl, which became Top of the Pop's theme tune for quite a few years. But yeah, it's amazing that these places still exist.
You joined Thin Lizzy really as, you know, they always had these floating guitarists, not because they wanted a floating guitarist, but people were always leaving for some reason, and you came in on a tour. So really you were viewed somewhere in the world as a hot guitarist.
Yeah, by someone else, probably not by myself. I proudly proclaim that I'm the worst guitarist that Thin Lizzy ever had. But it was very much a hired gun. You know, I knew I was going back to Ultravox. Ultravox had really... I'd come home when I joined Ultravox. It felt right. It was groundbreaking. It was exciting. It gave me the vehicle that I needed, and the guys in the band gave me the knowledge I needed to, you know, exorcise these ideas that I had in my head. It was just the right combination. It just felt great. So all the Concords and limos and, you know, axe wielding stuff that you do in America couldn't really entice me away from Ultravox.
This is really where, and a lot of people would just almost know you only from Ultravox. They weren't studying your moves as you went through.
Dark and murky past, yeah.
Electronic music was just starting to make a kind of wave of pop music as opposed to some kind of experimental form and some kind of starting of a dance music form. And those two groups, Visage and Ultravox, were amongst the first to have really big electronic hits, and there you were on both. And you did Fade to Grey with Steve Strange. Why was that? Why was Visage not the group that made it work?
Because Visage wasn't really a group. Visage was a studio project. It was never. I think there are only one or two photographs of the entire Visage lineup together. We never did a television show. We never did a live performance. It was a vehicle for creating, you know, electronic pop music, and with hindsight, you go back and look at it, and it was kind of the first of the palatable white dance European electronic pop music, and Fade to Grey became this huge hit. It was massive. It kind of bounced all around the world. But there was nothing to back it up. You know, we didn't. You know, Steve wasn't a singer. The band wasn't a band. It was a project, and a project that became hugely successful. But you're right. I mean, it was weird because having had years of no commercial success whatsoever, I found myself in a rehearsal room in North London, where my manager turned up with two great big magnums of champagne one day. And he proudly announced that I had 2 singles in the top 40 and 2 albums in the top 40, which was just bizarre. So it was an amazing time, but it soon veered off into very popcorn electronic pop music. Visage had kind of had its day, but Ultravox was much more of a rock band that used electronics. So that was something that was my band. That was the real thing. And Visage was a kind of project that led to Ultravox.
Ultravox is a strange situation because it is a group that exists in two forms. There's been a few of them along the way where the lineups changed or the singers changed, which is a very difficult thing for a band to do. And they had been a kind of serious, dark, electronic, sideways project, and suddenly you came out as this with the first absolutely massive, gobstacking, game-changing electro pop song in O Vienna, with a video that launched 1,000 videos of mean, moody people walking around streets and
sucking the cheeks in. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. Well, it's funny because you look back at it and you think, oh yeah, of course Vienna was going to be a hit record. And in reality, it wasn't going to be a hit record. It was a 4-minute long electronic ballad, very sparse with a viola solo in it. Now, if you'd written all that down and walked into Chrysalis Records and said, "This is what we're going to do," they would have shot you. They would have torn up the contract there and then. And it still took an awful lot of persuading to get Chrysalis to release that track as a single. Although the album was the title track of the album, it was the third single from the album. And they didn't agree to do it because they wanted to edit it down. They didn't agree to do it until they came and saw the band perform at Hammersmith Odeon, where when we performed that song as an album track, the entire audience just erupted. It just had this amazing effect. And that was when Chris Wright at Chrysalis said, "Okay, you're right, we're wrong, let's put it out as it is." And it could easily have fallen down between the cracks in the floorboards and just disappeared.
Did you know when you were creating it, because it has got a really dramatic sound and an unusual sound? Maybe it doesn't sound so unusual now, but it sounded very unusual then. Did you know when you were creating it that you'd hit on something?
Yeah, when we had made something interesting. I think small budgets, very limited time in the studio. It sparks creativity. We had 3 weeks to make that record, the whole album. So we had 10 days at Rack Studios in London and 10 days at Connie Plank Studio out in Neunkirchen and outside Cologne to finish it. And it really was, flying by the seat of your pants. We had no time to sit and analyse what we were doing. We just kind of got on and did it. And we were doing things that were kind of groundbreaking. This is way before MIDI, which is the way machines talk to each other, where a drum machine can sync with a synthesizer and play the pattern between them. This was all done freehand. This was played live. This was, the Vienna synthesizer, was all done with echoes and playing it live and manually. And you had to do that in time with the drum machine, which was playing separately. So if you made a mistake, you had to go back to the beginning and start again and play it all the way through.
Why O Vienna as opposed to Glasgow?
It's, well, Billy's a classically trained viola player, so he's steeped in that whole classical world, and a lot of the music in Vienna is his. The chord changes and the whole piano sequence in the middle and the viola and all of that stuff. It's really his. I walked into the rehearsal room one day and said, "I've got this thing in my head, this whole idea of we used to lie to you guys about it all the time and say it was all about Gustav Klimt and the secessionists, which it wasn't, because I'd never been to Vienna when we wrote the song, and I said, I've got this idea, and all I had was "This Means Nothing to Me" or Vienna. That's it, and the entire song kind of grew from there.
the strings, the rhythm is calling. Alone in the night as the daylight brings a cool empty silence. The warmth of your hand in a cold grey sky, it fades to the distance. The image is gonna make you and I, it means nothing to me. This means nothing to me. Oh, Vienna.
We're watching Needle Time, my guest, Midge. So Ultravox became a big band of the 80s and had a lot of hits, big albums, huge tours, and the next massive landmark on your career is the one that almost obliterates everything, which is that you co-wrote the Band-Aid single with Bob Geldof and got involved in launching Live Aid, the first great big multi-star charity extravaganza. Did you have any idea what you were getting involved in?
No, I think if either of us knew what it was going to grow into, this kind of monster we had created, we would have thought twice about it. But again, naivety plays its part. The desire to make a change took over. You know, Bob and I had known each other on and off since the Rich Kids days. You know, when the Rats were out, and you know, they used to come and see us, and we used to go and see them, and you know, we'd never planned on doing anything together. It came about simply because I happened to be on the rock TV show The Tube up in Newcastle, where Paula Yates co-hosted the programme, and Paula got some phone call from Bob, who was on talking about the Keys or something domestic, because the Boomtown Rats were finished. They were gone at that point, and he was a bit of a house husband, so he asked for me to be stuck on the phone, and we chatted, and he said, I've just seen this hideous thing on television, and it's Michael Buck report, and I want to do something about it. Will you help? And we met up a couple of days later, decided that the only thing we could actually do, the only thing we're capable of doing is writing a song. You know, we're not skilled at anything else. Not even skilled at writing songs. And we realised we couldn't just get a bunch of people together and cover White Christmas or whatever, because 50% of the money that is generated from selling records goes to the songwriters. So I had to write something, I had to create something. And he came to my studio. I had a studio in the bottom of my garden. And he came in and he played this thing at me. And every time he played it, it was different. So he was obviously kind of making it up as he went along. And I recorded him on a cassette. And said, okay, just leave it with me. And I spent 4 days in my studio while he rang up all our friends, all our contemporaries, asking them to come and lend their name to it. But by which point they'd all seen the same footage. They'd all seen the footage of this famine in Ethiopia. And I spent 4 days in my studio playing all the instruments and arranging this thing. And I think originally he wanted Trevor Horn to produce the record, but Trevor said it would take 6 weeks to make a single, which is a bit on the slow side. We had to have it done and ready within a couple of weeks, ready to be pressed up to get it in the shops in time for Christmas, because if we had a Christmas #1 record, you double or triple the sales that you'd normally get having a #1 any other time of the year. So that was our deadline. We had to have this done. And Trevor, instead of producing the record, gave us 1 day in his studio to finish it off, and that's the day that everyone remembers. Right. You know, all the artists, all with the headphones on, singing the thing.
Was it as jolly a spirit of all in this together as it appears, or was it one?
It was, weirdly enough. No, it was. I was chained to the desk. I never really got out to do anything in that 24-hour period. So my take on it was everybody was, nice as ninepins. They were fantastic. To the extent that when I had to throw them all out because we had to mix the records straight after, we had done the choral vocals, we had done the individual vocals, we had done Phil Collins' drums, and now I had to mix this thing to have it ready to go to the pressing plants at 8 o'clock on the Monday morning. And I couldn't do it because they were all having a party, they were all enjoying themselves. And it's a sad scenario when you think that, you know, the richest, most successful pop stars that the UK had to offer in London on a Sunday night, you know, everything's available to you. They couldn't bear to leave each other and go out into the big wide world. So we had to physically throw them out to get them out of the studio so we could do this this mixing. It was great.
So there's that life, and then there's the pop life, which changed. You know, Ultravox, you left. You had a big solo hit with "If I Was," which is also the title of your autobiography, and you took a bit of a darker turn there as well with the rock star's disease. It's not just the rock stars, but alcoholism, in your case, addiction. It's very common in that world. Do you think it had much to do with that world?
I think that there's no doubts that if you have enough bad stuff lined up in a row, like a series of dominoes, you know, you just have to push one over and the whole thing falls apart. And I can track it all. You know, the drinking thing was never a problem. It was only a problem when you ran out. You know, it was totally self-induced, as you say. You know, the bottle of Jack in the dressing room was just as important as the guitar tuner or the amplifier or the microphone. It all went hand in hand, and you were kind of not encouraged to do it, but you weren't discouraged. You know. Because as long as you're successful, people don't really tell you what you should be doing. They kind of leave you to it, leave you to your own devices. And when your career starts to kind of wane, which it inevitably does, very few people can sustain, you know, a really high career, you know, for long periods. It has to have peaks and troughs. And when that starts to go, it only takes something, you know, another couple of things to happen. You know, these are all, you know, high quality problems that I had. You know, my house in Montserrat got, you know, wiped out by a hurricane, and then I rebuilt it, and then it was wiped out by the volcano. That's not a hardship. You know, I come from Cambuslang. I shouldn't have a house in the Caribbean. You know, a divorce. You know, the emotional stress that causes, and the kind of tipping point for me was my father died, and you just have this series of things. And you realise that when you think, you know what, I'm going to stop this, you realise you can't. Your brakes don't work, you know, and that's when you need some help. And I was lucky enough to have enough people around me who could guide me and point this out and help me through it. So that's kind of what happens.
Do you think you lost a period creatively?
I think I lost a massive period creatively, and it wasn't really due to drink. I think the lack of creativity was due to record companies, and that led to the drink. I found myself signed to one of the then 5 major labels, but signed to the American side of the thing, and I'd watched from afar. I watched my career just disappear because there was huge antagonism between the American side of this company and the UK side of the company. So that exacerbates the drinking situation. So I wouldn't say the drink stopped me being creative. I'd say the vehicle that was there to enable me to be creative started me drinking.
Right. You know, Ultravox got back together, and you didn't just do the go out and play the album again. You made a new album. You've done solo stuff as well. It's not in the limelight, as it was. It's not in the hot focus of the pop moment. Is it still? Does it consume you as much? Are you still as involved in creating?
Absolutely. I think things change and things morph, but the desire to do it's still there. If I make an album now and a tenth of the people hear what I do as opposed to what they heard back in the halcyon days, it doesn't really matter. I remember having a conversation with Kate Bush once, a few years ago, many years ago, and she said, "I'm thinking of giving up music." I said, "Oh, Christ, you can't give up music, because if you give up music, then I'll give up music. And if I give it up, whoever I inspire is going to give it up. And then mediocrity wins. And where is that? Can you imagine, we're kind of drowning in it right now, but can you imagine it getting worse? Drowning in a sea of homogenised, disposable pop. I might as well have stayed in Slick if I let that happen. So my little fight against that is to carry on making music, which I think's interesting, which will scratch the itch of some of the kind of maybe hardcore fans. Some people out there will get what I do, and that's probably enough.
Do you play a lot of music just in your private existence? And if it does, I presume it's not the synthesizer you play on.
I play my guitar. You can take the boy away from his 6-string, but it doesn't. You don't go very far. I still love it. I'm a guitarist first and foremost. I wouldn't think of sitting at a keyboard or synthesizer and kind of jamming just to make lovely noises. But I would with the guitar. You revert back to your childhood. You play the tunes that you remember hearing on the radio, thinking, if only I was allowed to do that. And I'm one of the fortunate ones. I've got the best job in the world. I've been allowed to do it for a long time.
All right. Well, thank you for coming and sharing all that with
Absolute pleasure.
with us, Midge.
Thank you.